Alex here with part 12 of The Respondent. Pretty good chapter, not too long, not too short, and there were a few things that I had an opinion on. I especially liked his 6 silver bullets list, and I guess we'll just go in order from top to bottom. So, one of the things he mentions earliest in the chapter is that from the outside, a child custody dispute often does not look like that big of a deal. And if it is a big deal, people who are not involved in the dispute will often dismissively um, say things like, just work it out. Can't you work it out with them? Just who cares? Stop fighting. Just let them have what they want. I've heard these things in my own case too. One time from a teacher, I remember having the school dispute go before the court, and then I ended up winning. That our son would go to Coral Academy of Science. And after the shenanigans from the first year in which he had to drop out and re-enroll, one of the teachers was like, maybe it's just not worth all of this. You should just probably go to the school that your ex wants. And it's sad that a teacher would be so flippant about putting the child in the best education that you possibly can, and instead deciding, even if this isn't as good for him as, maybe the school isn't as good of a quality, it won't give as much opportunity, but at least it'll appease your ex. That kind of thinking from the outside, some people might say that makes sense. Yeah, your child is going to be put in a worse situation, but it's not worth the fight. A lot of people will say that, maybe not everyone, but a lot of people will say that. From the inside of the dispute, when you hear those things, it's like nails on a chalkboard. It's so infuriating, but at the same time, what can you really do? The other person has no hope of ever understanding what you're possibly going through. One of the thoughts being that even if you appease the ex, they'll just find a new conflict. It's totally something I can relate to, and I like that he brought that up. He also uses World War II later on as an analogy. He talks about the Japanese sneak attack on Pearl Harbor. I'm not going to go into the accuracy of what he's saying about the dynamic between the US and Japan, because I'm sure there are people like history buffs who will post in the comments that he's wrong. But I do like, if you just take it at face value, the analogy actually kind of makes sense. He's talking about how there were peace talks or diplomacy between the US and Japan leading up to the attack, and how the US, again, I don't know if this is accurate or not, I just love the analogy, how the US was committing in good faith to the negotiations and the peace talks and all that stuff. And the Japanese were just faking it. Like, they weren't actually intending to work out the disputes. They were using the diplomatic process, the mediation process, as a weapon to cover what they were actually going to do, which was sneak attack. And I do think that this actually is what happens in a lot of these high conflict cases. I do think that one side will decide that they're going to file for divorce or file a child custody petition, and before they file it, their thoughts are, okay, I need to get some evidence. So let's not say that we're going to divorce or break up now. Let's spend the next few weeks and months taking evidence, recording, video recording, audio recording, gathering paperwork, statements, maybe posts on social media, so that when you do file, you've got a huge head start on the other person. The other person was not in litigation mode. They weren't gathering evidence and recording you and stuff like that. It does actually make a lot of sense. And I do think that this is what happened in my case with my ex filing for the protective order and all that. And there were other situations where it kind of seemed like in hindsight she was trying to get some kind of proof or evidence. You know what? The most dangerous time, especially dangerous, is if you get back together. So like if you break up and then you get back together, that's where, if you're dealing with somebody who's like a high conflict deck, that's where you really need to be worried, because they might not actually want to get back together with you. Or even if they do, they want to prepare themselves for when the next breakup happens. And not only could they be trying to gather evidence and documentation and take video of you, they could also be willing to sort of do crazy things to create evidence, like triggering a fight. That is something that's happened where things were going not as well as one side wanted in court. So they faked wanting to get back together. So they start hanging out with each other. And all of a sudden there's a fight and a phone call for domestic violence. Little bit suspicious there as to all of a sudden why that's happening. So yeah, I do strongly agree with this. In fact, I think when I saw some of the clips of the Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard trial, I was my first reaction to seeing video evidence being played was, oh yeah, this person was getting ready to litigate. Normal people who are in a happy relationship don't think, hey, I'm going to take a video of my ex or my spouse, just, in case 3 or 4 years later we end up splitting up and I can use the video. Most people, when they start to actually take video, they've already gotten themselves in the right, mindset to litigate a case. That's my opinion. And if you're not thinking about going to court, your brain is just not in adversarial mode. You're still seeing your partner as your partner. You're still thinking that you're on the same side. So when somebody starts doing that, taking video and photo and stuff like that, they are in adversary mode in their head. So yeah, I totally agree with this analogy. He talks about reputation damage stemming from the custody dispute. I halfway agree with him. I feel like this is just a normal part of breaking up. And families are going to hear different sides, and friends are going to hear different sides, and people might pick, one side or the other, and relationships end. To me, that's very normal. That's not something to be alarmed about. Just accept it. I mean, if you had a friend that you thought fondly of, and they heard your ex's lies and they sided with your ex, maybe they aren't really that good of a friend. That's, to me, not a big deal. If you're not a celebrity or a politician, the stuff about reputation, word of mouth, and hearsay, I guess I can see why maybe even 5 or 6, 7 years ago, I would agree with him. But now, in hindsight, it really is kind of a trivial thing. You're just not, it's like, to really face intense reputational harm, you have to be under massive scrutiny, not just friends and family, but like you're in the newspaper, they're talking about you on TV, stuff like that. There is one exception that I will make for him, for the author, and that is if it affects your work. If it damages your ability to make money, that is a serious issue. And that's always been one of the things that confuses me. There are high conflict cases where an ex will do this, and I'm like, why are you doing that? Your child support and your alimony is going to go away. But I don't think that the people who engage in this high conflict behavior are logical. And yeah, they totally would cut off their nose to spite their face. It's There's even a video on YouTube. I can't remember what the title of the video was, but there was this father who went into court, child support court, and his ex was trying to put him in jail. And the judge started finding out, she was looking through the paperwork, and she's like, hold on a second, he's not paying child support because you filed this, So the judge realized that the reason the guy had no ability to make money, it was because his ex had ruined his ability to make money. And it kind of infuriated the court that she would first deprive him of his ability to make money and then accuse him of not paying child support and try and throw him in jail. It really bothered the judge. And that is something that, I mean, it's different. If they're affecting your ability to go to work, that's a very different situation, and you have to deal with that however you possibly can. Very serious. Okay, the next thing is the 6 silver bullets. He talks about, I guess I'll go through them in order. He talks about an arresting incident, how if you're arrested, that becomes something that is constantly brought up in the case. And it's absolutely true. If you get arrested, even if you're not convicted, it gets brought up over and over and over again. In my case, I didn't have this situation, but I could totally see any attorney clinging to that 5, 10, 15 years later, anytime something is filed in court, because they just kind of want to set the background up that you're a criminal, even though you're not. So the next is order of restraint, which we call orders of protection in Nevada. The domestic violence allegations, stuff like that. Yeah, it part of the reason why this is a silver bullet is because the law makes it into one. So in Nevada, if you can show that your ex committed domestic violence, there's this presumption that they shouldn't have physical custody. So because of that law, that's what this has turned into. Now, the legislature was smart in the sense that they made the standard higher than preponderance of the evidence. It's clear and convincing evidence standard. So I don't think it's as bad in Nevada as it probably is in a lot of other states. In fact, in hindsight, even back in 2008, when my ex took this strategy, when she fired off this silver bullet, it didn't really work for her in family court. I mean, it did allow her to get the confidential address program and claim that she was a victim because of the admission into that program. But it wasn't effective. I mean, just because she was using those claims and saying those things in court doesn't mean it worked. Her efforts failed. In other states, it could be a much more powerful silver bullet. He talks about the security lock, changing passwords, codes, cutting the kids off from their ability to communicate with you. Uh, that might not necessarily be a high conflict thing. That could just be a person trying to reduce the conflict by reducing using the children as an avenue for communication. So to me, that's not automatically a silver bullet. I get that some parents feel that they're going to solve the problems by using their kids in court. That is the wrong approach. I've talked about it in so many different videos as to why that won't work. And so for me, that's not really a great sort of silver bullet. The next one, I guess he focuses on the use of a supervisor, which ended up being a witness or an attempted witness. They were funneling information to the other side. I have always felt that that's the case. I have always felt that when you're getting supervised visits, it's not just that somebody is watching you to make sure that you're not hurting the kids. The person oftentimes turns into a witness for your ex. And to me, it does seem like sometimes, if not most of the time, they want they want to put you under supervised visits just because they're trying to gather more evidence. They just don't feel they have enough evidence. And now they can pick up this new witness who's a neutral third party, and they can come to court and testify and affect the custodial outcome. So when he says that this was something that bothered him, this is a silver bullet, I would agree that's, and in my case, I had supervised visits right at the beginning. And that was my vibe too, is that this particular person that she chose was connected to her, was her friend, and this particular person can be a witness in the case now. They can say, hey, look, these are the things that I saw during the exchanges. It's not good. I mean, it's not good to claim that you're going to get a supervisor to protect the kids when in reality, all you're trying to do is create more evidence. It's one of the things that makes people feel that the system doesn't make any sense and that it's unfair. So next we have the financial accounting silver bullet. I don't know. I mean, he called it recounting. I guess in the sense that the only real thing, and I'm going to just lump this into the next one, which what he called the sixth bullet, legal retention. The only real thing that kind of jumps out at me is that there is a strategy to depriving your ex of as much money as possible. There just is. Because if your ex doesn't have any money and they can't afford an attorney, now they have to represent themselves. They're not going to know what they're doing, and they could potentially get a huge advantage over that person. So yeah, I mean, it's tough for me to talk much about it because it didn't apply in my case because I represented myself most of the time. And when I did have help from attorneys, it was usually free. So for me, it wasn't really a thing. But I can totally see how this is a silver bullet in and of itself, because if you find ways to deprive your opponent of money, they're not going to be able to litigate their case, which ironically might actually lead to you getting even more money in the form of attorney fees or the division of assets and debts. Next we have, let's see, he talks about how, okay, so he does talk about how when a woman accuses a man of a crime, everybody just believes them and nobody follows due process. I mean, really, I talk about this in the gender bias video. It's not a problem in Nevada. Maybe other states it is, but not here. I just can't relate to this because I didn't really experience gender bias that much in my case. I experienced self-representation bias, which is a separate video topic. So, I mean, I understand his point, and maybe where he litigated that was the case, but not something that I can relate to. And then the last thing that he talks about is trust and mistrust, and how you can't make decisions effectively or efficiently if you don't trust your ex. This is true. But there's nothing you could do about it. Just because in an ideal world both sides trust each other, just because that's the case doesn't mean that you can try and do that in your own case. I talk about why this doesn't work in the video Stop Believing the Liar. And it also ties into the video How Abusers Win. So you just have no choice. You have no choice but to stop trusting your ex. You just have to. And yeah, it's going to be difficult to make decisions effectively and efficiently because you don't really have a co-parenting situation. You have a parallel parenting situation, or even a counter-parenting situation. But that's just the reality of the situation. You know, you can't think to yourself, we're not going to be able to help our child unless we trust, so I'm just going to start trusting her again. And then you get backstabbed 15 different times and you end up losing custody, and you just can't do it. You're forced to operate in this highly inefficient, ineffective form of parenting because that's really the only choice you have. That's the only path you can take. The other path leads to just you being duped again and ending up even in a worse situation than you would have ended up in if you just accepted the reality, which is that there is not going to be any trust ever. this is just the way it's going to be forever. And at least you can then make the best decision possible. It may not be the most ideal or perfect situation or decision, but you'll at least be able to make the best decision possible because you understand the reality of the dynamic between you and your ex. A pretty good chapter. I like this chapter. That's all I have for now. If you guys have any questions or comments, feel free to post them down in the comments below, and I will see you guys next time.